The nice part is the key parts are near the beginning here. So certification, I want everyone to kind of understand if you decide to go into NDT, what you're looking at. How do you get certified and where can you take those certifications? I've mentioned throughout the semester quite a few times that NDT extends far beyond aviation and all kinds of industries. Several of you did projects on NDT in other industries, whether it's electronics or wind turbines, right? We had, you found applications all over. So for aviation, however, NDT is covered in Advisory Circular AC 6531B, and it covers two areas. The first is individuals. So if you're going to have an individual, it has recommendations, and I have recommendations underlined. We'll talk to, or I have individuals underlined, but recommendations is also a key word here. As we go into this, why is it a recommendation and not necessarily a requirement? But for individuals, things like experience, training, what kind of qualifications, how have you been tested, your examination, and then ultimately, how do you show certification? From an organization side of things, there are recommendations for, what should your written program look like? If you're going to have NDT, if you're going to have people perform NDT on aircraft, you have to have some kind of a written program that says this is how we're going to do it. It's typically bigger things like airlines, MROs. It's built into what's called their op spec, their operational specifications, which cover every form. There's maintenance op specs, and there's op specs for the actual operations, and there's op specs for ground handling, and there's op specs for NDT, which is also going to cover how is that organization, you're working for an organization, how are you going to train your people that are NDT qualified? How are you going to actually qualify them? And how are you going to provide certification? And so that's outlined in this advisory circular. I've got a link to it on e-learning if you want to go in and read it. I know you all love reading FAA documents because they're so entertaining, or if you're having trouble falling asleep at night, they're really good for that. But essentially, inside or outside of aviation, NDT certification is company-based. It's kind of like OSHA. Some of you are probably familiar with OSHA. You get like a forklift certification at one place. That doesn't necessarily transfer over somewhere else. I have a forklift certification here at Western. I can't go over to Graphic Packaging in Kalamazoo and start driving a forklift around their warehouse, right? So it's a company-based thing. So that training and certification program, that one I was talking about, that's outlined in the advisory circular, is going to show this. Now, it is an in-house NDT program. It doesn't mean all the training and qualification has to necessarily take place by an in-house trainer or an in-house certifier, right? Part of that program can be saying, we are going to reach out to the, let me think. We're going to reach out to the American Society of Non-Destructive Testing and have a representative from them come in and qualify our individuals. We're going to have somebody from the Infrared Training Center come in and qualify our individuals in thermography, right? You don't have to have these trainers in-house, especially if you're a smaller organization or if you only have a few people who are doing a certain technique. It doesn't make sense to have somebody that's extremely highly qualified and able to teach this method if you only have a few people using it, right? They would be sitting around twiddling their thumbs most of the time. So it also includes things like experience in OJT. As you've seen in lab, these are not techniques you necessarily learn just by studying in the classroom, right? It takes some hands-on work. You have to document and keep records of that. And then you have your certification program, which is internal. So when you're certified at a company. But they can, that certification, that op spec can say we can use outside providers. It can also mean people doing it NDT at a company are not necessarily employees of that company. Okay, we can say part of our NDT program is we're going to reach out and have some come in. When do we have Piper Arrows? Were the Arrows the planes we used to have here? Does that sound right? I don't remember. I think they were Arrows. Piper had issued an AD. I know it was the Pipers. I can't remember the exact plane. I think it was the Arrows. Piper issued an AD. We had 2 of them here. They were the high performance single engine trainers. After Embry-Riddle has a fleet of them, after Embry-Riddle had a plane crash because of a spar failure. And they said any of these that are used in a training environment, they realized there were cracks that formed where the wings bolted to the fuselage. The crash was the wings basically came off in flight. And so they grounded, there was an emergency AD where you had to remove the wing bolts, the bolts that held the wings, and you had to perform, I believe it was eddy current, in those wing bolt holes in the spar to make sure your spar wasn't cracking from the wing bolt holes. What's that? You do? Okay, don't worry about it. Western doesn't have a qualified person. We don't even have an NDT program in-house for our fleet service. So they brought somebody in that was qualified from, I think it's a company out of Grand Rapids. Not 100% sure. Did you guys look into that? Who they brought in? No. So they brought in an outside individual to come in and do that. So our outspec says any NDT performed over at fleet service is going to be done by an outside individual. Part of the reason, like I wouldn't do it, is that we don't keep all our equipment calibrated, right? So we couldn't even use our in-house equipment if we wanted to. It's more expensive to keep all that stuff calibrated and to keep me qualified every couple of years than it is just to bring someone in from the outside once in a while. That was the only time they've done eddy current since I've been here, right? So, again, if you're using an outside organization, you have to be able to verify the training and certification, and you have to be able to verify as an organization that your outside supplier has the experience in OJT, and you have to be able to produce records showing that they have. Okay, so this is if you have a third party come in and do it. Those company or certification programs typically are based on one or more recognized, national or internationally recognized standards. Okay? And that includes things like how have people been trained in the classroom? What kind of experience have they had? And then what kind of examinations or practical tests have they taken in order to show it? And again, this can be done if you are smaller, if you don't do NDT all the time. It's probably going to be done by an outside organization. If you're at the airline, an MRO, you're doing this all the time, maybe it makes sense to bring it in-house. Everywhere I worked, it was a mix of stuff. Ultrasound was done in-house. Liquid penetrant was done in-house. Eddy current, some of it was done in-house. Magnetic particle, we had a back shop that could do certain parts, bolts and smaller parts, but we didn't have a giant bench to be able to do like whole landing gear legs. So we outsourced that to Duncan, actually, in Lincoln, Nebraska. They have a big NDT shop that can do that stuff. X-ray, we had people come in that did the X-ray. They did our X-ray, they did Delta's X-ray, they did, they did all these other airlines. They basically traveled around doing X-ray. Right? We didn't have any of the equipment. We brought in a third-party company to do the X-ray stuff. The airlines didn't want to deal with the radiation stuff and the expensive equipment when we didn't use it that often. So it's some kind of a mix. Ultimately, however, the employer or whoever is getting the NDT done is the one required to ensure that the person performing NDT is proficient and is qualified and is able to do that method. So that can be certified by an outside agency, and that outside agency can administer all that, and the outside agency may even issue a certificate. Like, I don't have any NDT training from Western. Mine's all from third-party companies, right? Or third-party organizations. But, if I was to perform NDT for Western, Western would be responsible for that, right? They would be buying off that. Western would have to say, yes, Jeff has gone to the Infrared Training Center and he's been trained by this company. We trust that this, we have examined this company and we know that they are training individuals to the standards that we require. Okay. So different standards, you'll see some of these organizations. The Aerospace Industries Association, that publishes standards for NDT. AIA. ATA, you're all familiar with ATA, coming up with ATA codes. ATA also does specs. So Air Transportation Association. American Site and Non-Destructive Testing, that's their standards book. ISO, International Organization for Standards. You've probably seen, maybe seen ISO out there. That tends to be more of a manufacturing. Mil specs, military standards, Canadian national regulations. There's also European standards and all that. So there's more than what's on this list, but there are lots of kind of standards out there that you can say, okay, this individual has been trained to these standards, so they're qualified to perform this. Okay. It might have. I'd have to, I don't keep track of all the industry. So some of the key points, though, is that when you have an NDT program, this applies to all NDT methods, but each method is, you're certified separately, right? Just because you're certified in dye penetrant doesn't mean you can perform eddy current. Seems obvious, right? That makes sense. Just because you're certified in mag particle doesn't mean you can perform holographic testing. So certified individuals, you have to have a general understanding of all methods covered by your organization's NDT program. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a general understanding of all methods. There's more methods out there than you would, there's a lot of these real niche methods that, we'll probably hear about in some people's presentations coming up. But you don't have to be aware of all those. But however, if your company does borescope and liquid penetrant and mag particle and ultrasound, did I say eddy current? And if they bring in X-ray once in a while, I think those were the 6 we had. Oh, and IR, infrared thermography. As part of getting qualified to do borescope and liquid penetrant, I had to just know about all those other methods. So those were the first 2 we got qualified for at the airlines, borescope, liquid penetrant, and then I got ultrasound and eddy current later on. But initially I had to know what our program entailed, those different methods. The certification, however, and level is method by method. So you have to, again, like I said, you can't be certified in one and perform a different one. And the other part is you must pass a basic vision test. And this is acuity and color perception in order to perform any method. And that's a yearly, basically you have to have a yearly eye exam. Now it's not an eye exam, you don't have to go to an ophthalmologist or optician. It can be performed in-house. And it's as simple as, so acuity, most of you are probably familiar with the letter charts, right? And it doesn't have to be, it can be corrected, right? You can wear glasses, you can wear contacts. It doesn't have to be without things. You can, this is corrected acuity. So a visual acuity, smallest letters you can read. This is known as a Snellen chart, or a card held 20 feet away. And so 6531B, that advisory circular we talked about earlier, near vision, at least one eye, corrected or uncorrected, needs to be 20/25. So from 20 feet away, you need to be able to read this line right here. Okay. Now my chart's blown up really big too, by the way. My chart's not calibrated. So you can, probably most of you can read that line from further than 20 feet away at this point. 20/20 vision is this line here. Some people have even better than that. So this has to be checked annually, and it was, in our case, it was done by the QC manager at the base. So essentially the head of quality control, the head of inspection at the base that you were at would come in and perform this. Okay. The other one you have to do is a color perception test, and this measures your ability to tell the difference among colors. I think you've all heard me mention I'm colorblind before, but I have a high enough level of color perception that I am able to be NDT qualified. Okay? So it's not an all or nothing. Certain types of color blindness are okay. But you have to be able to distinguish and differentiate between the colors necessary for the inspection. So this only needs to be completed once. Typically, your color vision doesn't change much throughout your life. And this can be an Ishihara test, like this, or it can be a yarn test, basically a bunch of pieces of yarn. I fail this test miserably, by the way. I cannot do an Ishihara test, but I could pass the yarn test. The yarn test, I don't have a picture of it, but basically it's a bunch of pieces of yarn in different colors, and you say, that one's red, and that one's yellow, and that one's green, and that one's blue, and that one's, that's all you got to do. This one, anyone see that? Okay, that one's designed, you should be able to see it no matter what your vision is. How about that? Yeah, I can barely see that one. Anyone see that? Yeah, you know what I see? Anyone see 70? So that's one that they can use to differentiate if you're colorblind or not. That looks like a 70 to me. I'm red-green, yeah. What's that one? Yeah, I can see the 2, but I can't see the 4. The 2 is right here. I don't see anything over on this side. Those are about the only ones I see, by the way. No, that goes back to this test here. That's kind of in this category. Plus, they can say, well, what's the position, right? Red, yellow, green, right? I can see the bottom one. Yeah, the bottom one was on. There was snow on it. There was snow. I couldn't see it. Sir, it's July. No. Okay, so certification levels, we'll get through these and kind of wrap this up. We're almost done, I promise. Level 1 is basic certification. This is what most people in an organization are going to be. This is you can prepare parts, you can conduct a test, you can record the data, and you can make decisions on clear indications. You, however, cannot perform what's called interpretation. That is reserved for a level 2. So a level 2 is all the level 1 items. Here, you can set up and standardize equipment. What I mean by set up, preparing parts, setup is basically doing kind of the calibration checks and that kind of thing. It's not the plug the wires in and perform the method. That is still kind of part of preparing to conduct the test. Okay, if you're just getting the eddy current tester out and plugging the wire in and hooking the lead up to your probe and then performing it, you can do that as a level 1. But if you actually have to set up and standardize, that's the key part, standardize the equipment, that you would have to have a level 2 for. You can conduct the test, which is the same thing you can do as a level 1. And now you can interpret and evaluate the results. Okay, if they are slightly unclear or if there's something that's not obvious, you can start to perform interpretation. Okay, it's a level 2. Level 3 is the highest, so you can do all the level 1 and 2 items. That makes sense. Now, this is getting into somebody who's going to be designing the tests. You select methods and techniques for a given part. You make the determination for what reference standards should be, or you design reference standards. You write the actual test procedures. This is where you say, you set your frequency to this. You set your amplitude to this, when you kind of do those. Now, there's some where you have to calibrate, standardize as part of the setup process. But this is writing those kind of test procedures. And then this is also where you can interpret regulation standards and codes. So it's, we've all heard that, FAA gives you these regulations and they're open to lots of interpretation. This is the person doing that, not someone that's a level 1 or a level 2. This is the person that's going to sign off and say, this is how we meet the requirements set out in this federal regulation. Okay. In order to get to these different levels, so level 1, level 2, you can see they have, these are, let me think, over here, these are classroom hours. So eddy current, ultrasound, you got to have 40. You can see mag particle only takes 16 hours of classroom time for level 1. Same thing with penetrance. So you can tell, you've all done all of these so far, except radiography, right? It kind of ties in with how easy or hard the methods are to do. Right? The methods that are harder take more time. And then level 2 here, where it says classroom instruction, this is say eddy current, this is an additional 40 hours to go from level 1 to level 2. An additional 40 hours for ultrasound, an additional 16 hours for mag particle. Okay, so to get to a level 2, you need 80 hours of eddy current, 80 hours, and that's just the classroom time. On top of that, here's your experience in months. Okay? Or sorry, hours a month. 480 hours or 3 months, right? To get to level 2, 1,440 hours or 9 months. You can see it's much higher bar. It's a much higher bar to get to a level 2 than it is to get level 1. Okay? What's that? Going to like a level 2? That's getting into more of that interpretation and calibration versus level 1, which is just performing the method and being able to say, if you have an obvious result, this is what it is. Okay? Level 3 gets even higher than that. You have to have either a 4-year college or university curriculum with a degree in an engineering or related science, plus a minimum 1 year, or 2 years of study, plus 2 years of experience, or 4 years of experience in an assignment comparable to that of a level 2 in the method you're doing. Okay? So though you're not necessarily engineering, if you were to go and become a level, do this daily, if you work for a company where you do NDT pretty much exclusively, you could get to that level 3. You could get enough OJT experience to do that. Plus, having the degree already kind of puts you ahead in that. Even though it's not an engineering degree, it's considered a technical degree where you've learned about this kind of thing and you're kind of moving towards it. In order to maintain it, you have to recertify or every 3 years if you're a level 1 or 2. Which reminds me, I think my thermography one expired this year. Level 3, you have to recertify every 5 years. Certification can be revoked. Demonstrates unsatisfactory performance. You done screwed up too many times. Okay. If you're inactive for 6 months or more, and if you're not able to meet the vision requirements. Okay, any one of those can cause you to lose certification, or if your last vision examination is over 1 year out. Right? Every year there was a panic at the airline when they realized they hadn't checked anyone's vision in like 11 months and 28 days. Right? So then every inspection manager is coming in with eye charts, checking everyone that was qualified to make sure they still had acuity. And finally, just know it is a qualification, not a license. Okay? It's a certificate. So if you change employers, the new employer does not have to accept previous qualification. Okay, previous certification. However, if you're like a level 3 and you get hired somewhere to do, they're probably going to be like, yeah, we you know your stuff, right? They might check you out, do some stuff to verify it. But an organization can grandfather you in, or they can have a program to bring you on board to bring you in as qualified, but there's no guarantee. They don't have to recognize that. Now, again, most of these, since they're based on national or international standards, and since there's a certain level of training required, and it's all documented, it's all on paper, it's all written out, you can oftentimes take qualifications with you from one place to another. But there's nothing that says you have to. When I went from Masaba Airlines to SkyWest Airlines, they did not transfer my NDT. Now, I didn't have a lot because I wasn't at Masaba a long time. But they didn't transfer my liquid penetrant over because they had no formal way of doing it in that case. Really wasn't worth it for them anyways. So they didn't bother with it. They just got me trained. They just had me sit through a 16-hour training again. Wasn't a big deal. So, okay. That's it. Any questions?